Germany is a state in which the latter, I've never been bored. Throughout its existence, in various iterations, it has firmly taken its place in the chapters of history since the time of the Franks. Germany is featured in all or almost all of the major historical events. We have already talked about many parts of German history, undeservedly forgetting about one of the most important parts, the partition and then the subsequent unification of Germany and the GDR. And today, we will talk about the separation Germany, the reasons for this event, the history of the GDR, and finally, how and why the reunification of the country took place. Make yourself comfortable and we'll start. On 8th May, 1945, the unconditional surrender of Germany was signed in Berlin. On the German side, Field Marshal Keitel, General Stumpf, and Admiral von Friederburg signed the surrender. Was accepted by Marshal Zhukov and Marshal Ted. We will immediately answer the popular question: if the surrender was signed on May 8th, why is Victory Day celebrated on the 9th? Everything is actually very simple. The difference in time zones ended the signing procedure, capitulation, at 22:43 on Central European time, while in Moscow it was already 0:43 on May 9th. A month after the signing of the surrender, the agreements of the victorious powers on the division of German territory into 4 parts of the 4 occupation zones were published as follows: Soviet Eastern Occupation Zone, British Northwestern Occupation Zone, American Southeastern Occupation Zone, and the French Western. At the same time, the occupation zone was located in Berlin, the capital of Germany. In the Soviet zone, the city was also divided between 4 Allied powers according to the same principle as the entire country period. The occupation also had the name Zero. During these years, massive local reforms took place, ranging from administrative to monetary. New parties were formed, and party purges took place. Such a policy implied the maximum removal of functionaries of the former National Socialist Workers' Party, NSD, from any leadership positions. Some were imprisoned, some managed to escape the country. In 1948, the First Berlin Crisis began. To understand in detail, it is necessary to recall the situation in the world during these years. On March 5, 1946, in the city of Fulton, the Prime Minister in Great Britain, Winston Churchill, delivered his famous speech, which is considered to be the beginning of the Cold War. In fact, the Cold War began later, and just the First Berlin Crisis was one of its earliest manifestations. The key reason for the First Berlin Crisis was monetary reform. The first reform, which mainly consisted of exchanging old Reichsmarks for new banknotes, was carried out by the occupation authorities in the British, American, and French zones, followed 3 days later on June 23, 1945, by the Soviet occupation forces. The authorities carried out their monetary reform in the controlled lands. Due to the difference in the exchange rate of Reichsmarks and different economic ideologies, the borders of the Soviet zone were closed, which led to, among other things, a complete blockade of West Berlin. Many consider these events to be the reason for the split of Germany. This point of view is quite controversial, and that is why the creation of an independent state on the territory of the German on May 24, 1949, were proclaimed in the city of Bonn. This state became the Federal Republic of Germany, which includes the territories of the British, French, and American occupation zones, while the German government saw itself as the legitimate representative of the entire German people, and the only real Germany, the German Democratic Republic. The GDR, which included the lands of the Soviet zone of occupation, was established a little later on October 7, 1949. However, Germany, based on its course of the only Germany in the GDR, did not recognize and de facto ignored the existence of a neighbor. Despite this, until 1967, citizens of both Germans had a unique German citizenship recognized in Germany. In the early 50s, political and administrative reforms began in the GDR. This process was called the Sovietization because it took place with a direct look at the USSR and with its help. However, the process did not go smoothly, resulting in demonstrations and strikes. Began in general, the relatively low level of the economy, low standard of living, and sometimes repression led to the fact that part of the GDR population fled to Germany for a better life. The easiest way to do this was to cross Berlin from east to west, and then go to Germany. Precisely because of the flight from one Germany to another, on the night of August 13th, 1961, the construction of the Berlin Wall began. The main symbol of the Cold War, the Second Berlin Crisis, has started. And frequent question in this regard is why it was not possible to unite the two Germans into one, or what prevented Berlin from becoming a kind of free city. The answer is quite simple. In 1952, Stalin proposed a plan for the unification of Germany. The so-called Note, Stalin's proposal for an independent status for Germany, was subsequently rejected as the Federal Republic of Germany became a part of the North Atlantic Alliance, and the GDR were a member country of the Warsaw Pact organization. That is, they found themselves on different sides of the barricades. The issue of unification rested on which bloc the united country would move to. The parties could not agree to a non-aligned status of the state. Someone had to make concessions. Speaking of the GDR, we will dispel one of the popular myths that concerns the country's economy stagnating. It is worth making a reservation right away that Germany and the GDR, having previously been one state, functioned as one entity and had resource and industrial resources. After the split of the country, these centers also turned out to be on different sides. Nevertheless, if we talk about dry figures, in the 50s, industrial output in Germany increased by 210 and in the GDR by 241 years. The annual increase in production in Germany was about 9%, while in the GDR it was at the level of 10. Therefore, it can be unanimously stated that the GDR economy was not backward, as it often is called. At the same time, it cannot be said that it did not have problems. They definitely existed, and at the same time were quite acute. Otherwise, people would not have fled in Germany. For example, in the GDR, the production of consumer goods was at a fairly low level, and industrial equipment was rarely updated. As we have already said, until the mid-1960s, the Germans of the two countries had a unique citizenship. And before 1965, a united Olympic team was fielded. The division into national teams, as well as the entire sport of these two states, was a zone of struggle between political interests which only cost the USSR's consent to the tragically famous Olympic Games in 1972, in Munich, in a city that was part of the Federal Republic of Germany. We have a separate video about this event, which you can find at the link in the description. By the way, the GDR national team beat the German national team in the medal standings, earning 69 medals, 29 more than the competitor country as a whole. Already in the second half of the 1960s, the trend towards normalization of relations between the two countries began. Germany, in June 1973, the Treaty on the Foundations of Relations between Germany and the GDR entered into force, which included clauses on, in 1973, Germany officially recognized the GDR, followed by the establishment of diplomatic relations. Throughout the decade of the 70s, Germany is gradually moving closer to the absence of any confrontation, while simultaneously developing as sovereign states, however, with the idea that reunification will happen someday. By the way, despite the ingrained opinions that repression and various oppressions flourished in the GDR, in reality everything was quite the opposite. In 1980, a general amnesty was declared in the country and the death penalty was abolished, while murderers, spies, and those convicted for war crimes, crimes against humanity, and Nazis were not amnestied. This decision was dictated by the fact that the crime rate in the GDR decreased year after year, reaching a minimum in 1986. Of the crimes committed, only 4% were for serious crimes. In addition to amnesty, judicial reform was carried out. From 1900 to 87, more than 70% of all preventative measures were not related to imprisonment. In 1989, the opposition movement New Forum was created in the GDR. For democratizing censorship and reducing party control over public life, this found a response among the masses, and throughout Eastern Europe in the fall, demonstrations have begun. This resulted in the resignation of the government and the appointment of a member of the New Forum as chairman of the new government. Demonstrations continued, and eventually, 9 November, GDR citizens were allowed free travel abroad. The Berlin Wall fell. Large-scale reforms and desovietization of the country began. On March 18, 1990, a party called the Christian Democratic Union won the election. The newly elected party began active negotiations with Germany to unite the country. As a result, on August 31, 1990, an agreement was signed between